If you believe that one kind act can change a life, if you believe in helping others, even when the world looks the other way, if you believe in humanity, in second chances, and in the kind of love that quietly finds you when you least expect it, then you've found the right place. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a story. It's a quiet miracle that unfolded one cold morning in the heart of Portland, Oregon. A struggling single father, burdened by the weight of 2 jobs and a life full of quiet sacrifices, finds himself standing at a crossroads, a burning school bus, children screaming, and without hesitation he runs toward the fire. He doesn't know their names. He doesn't ask who they belong to. All he knows is that someone needs saving. But what he doesn't expect is who arrives at the hospital. A Rolls Royce, a woman with power, grace, and a past of her own. And when she learns what this man has done for her daughters, she walks toward him, her voice trembling, and says just 3 words: "Marry me." Stay with us, because this story will stir your soul. It will remind you that strength has many forms, and that sometimes the most valuable hearts are the ones the world nearly overlooked. Let's begin. Ordinary life of a struggling dad. Daniel had never imagined life would turn out this way. If you'd asked him back in high school, he might have told you he dreamed of becoming a mechanic, maybe even opening up a little garage of his own someday. He had a natural gift with tools. Engines made sense to him in a way people never quite did. But dreams like that? They don't always stand tall when life keeps throwing punches and you run out of strength to block them all. He lived in a small, weathered apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like old wood and fried onions. The walls wore peeling paint, the kitchen faucet leaked, and the floorboards creaked under every careful step. But to Daniel, this place wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was home. It was the place where his daughter Emma rested her head every night. Emma was 6, bright-eyed, curious, always full of questions he didn't always have the answers to. She had her mother's intelligence and his smile, though she barely remembered her mother now. Daniel didn't speak much about her, not because of bitterness, but because some stories are too heavy to carry aloud, especially when the wounds haven't fully healed. Emma's mother had left when she was just a toddler, said Daniel wasn't going anywhere, that he was too slow, that she couldn't carry both a child and a man who struggled to keep up. Daniel remembered every word, not because he wanted to, but because they echoed in his mind on the quietest nights. He didn't fight back. He just held his baby girl close and made her a promise: "You will never feel abandoned." Daniel had a mild learning disability. Reading took him longer. Math was a challenge. Filling out forms made his hands sweat. The world looked at him and saw someone less than. Not dangerous, not mean, just not enough. But what no one could say was that he didn't try. He worked during the day at a hardware store and cleaned offices at night. Never missed a shift, never made excuses, just showed up, did what needed to be done. Quiet, steady, honest. Each morning began before dawn. Daniel would tiptoe through the apartment, trying not to wake Emma. He packed her lunch with whatever he could find. Sometimes a peanut butter sandwich, sometimes just crackers and a juice box. On good weeks, maybe an apple or a small chocolate tucked beside a note that said, "I love you." Then he'd walk her to school, her tiny hand held in his calloused one. She'd chatter the whole way. About her drawings, her teacher, a classmate's puppy. Daniel didn't always understand every detail, but he listened and smiled. Just the sound of her voice reminded him, "You have something beautiful in this world, something worth waking up for." From there, he'd head straight to the hardware store. The manager, Mr. Thorne, was an older man with kind eyes. He understood Daniel's pace and gave him jobs he could handle, stocking shelves, sorting bolts, helping customers find what they needed. Daniel took pride in it. Maybe he didn't shine like others, but he showed up. That, he figured, was his superpower. In a world full of big talkers, he was someone who stayed. After work came his night shift, and when he returned home, aching knees, stiff back, shoulders heavy, he always saved enough energy to sit beside Emma and watch a borrowed cartoon from the public library DVD shelf. They'd split a small burger, 1 patty, 2 halves, and laugh at silly voices, sing along to old theme songs. Before bed he'd read to her. He stumbled sometimes, guessed at hard words, but Emma never laughed. She'd scoot close and help him sound them out. "You're the best reader, Daddy," she'd whisper, and he'd believe her, because in her eyes he wasn't broken. He was enough. Winter brought the cold. Daniel wrapped Emma in thrift store sweaters and hand-me-downs. He often went without gloves so she wouldn't have to. They didn't have much. No vacations, no new toys. But inside their little home there was warmth, the kind you don't buy, the kind you build. Daniel didn't have many friends. People his age had moved on, new homes, new lives. But he had no time for all that. Emma was his world. If she had a school recital, he'd be there in his one clean shirt. If she was sick, he'd stay up all night. If she was scared, he'd sit on the edge of her bed and hum the same lullaby his mother once sang to him. His past held old scars. A father who left too soon, a mother who stayed too far away, childhood classrooms where he was teased, pitied, forgotten. But Daniel carried one dream through it all, to be the kind of father he never had. And when Emma came into his life, wrapped in a tiny blanket with eyes full of trust, he whispered a promise into the silence of the hospital room. "I'm going to be better for you. I promise." That promise guided every decision. Even when a better-paying job came along that demanded overnight shifts and weekends away, he said no, because weekends were for Emma. Pancakes with water and flour, card games, crayon drawings too small to grip, but filled with colour and love. Some nights after Emma had gone to bed, Daniel would sit quietly by the window, a cup of tea in his hands, staring at the distant city lights, wondering if life would ever change. He didn't wish for riches. Just a little peace, a future for Emma that wasn't weighed down by everything he carried. There were days it felt too heavy, bills, pitying glances, whispers of judgment, but Daniel kept going, not from obligation, but love. A quiet, patient love. He never saw himself as a hero. Most days he felt invisible. But in the arms of one little girl, he was more than enough. And what Daniel didn't know was that life was about to shift in a way he could never imagine. That soon the world would see what Emma had always seen, that even the most ordinary man can hold the most extraordinary heart, because sometimes, in the quietest corners of life, a miracle is waiting to begin. A fateful morning begins like any other. The morning began quietly, as if unaware of what lay ahead. A cold breeze drifted through the cracks in Daniel's small apartment, its chill settling into the thin fabric of his worn-out jacket. He stood over the modest stove, carefully flipping a piece of toast in the pan. The butter sizzled softly, releasing a faint but familiar warmth, one that reminded him, however briefly, of comfort. He glanced up at the wall clock, its glass cracked diagonally across the face. 6:30 a.m. Time to wake Emma. With soft steps, Daniel entered her room, a gentle, lived-in space filled with pale colours, threadbare stuffed animals, and drawings taped lovingly to the walls. Emma lay curled up beneath her blanket, her limbs tangled like a kitten in sleep. Daniel knelt beside her bed and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Morning sunshine," he whispered, his voice light and warm as he gently nudged her shoulder. Emma stirred with a groggy murmur, then turned with a sleepy smile. "Is it pancake day?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Only in your dreams. Toast and jelly today. Come on now. We don't want to miss the bus." With a yawn that seemed far too big for such a small girl, Emma sat up and stretched dramatically, arms reaching toward the ceiling. Daniel laid out her clothes for the day, a pair of leggings and a faded sweater with a unicorn on the front. While Emma dressed, he packed her lunch. Half a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a small apple and a juice box that had seen better days. As always, he slipped in a note. "You are brave. You are kind. You are loved." She may not have read them all yet, but Daniel believed, perhaps one day when she was older, those words would matter. Emma emerged with her hair messy and her eyes more awake now. She sat at their tiny kitchen table, and together they shared a simple breakfast. She chatted about her upcoming day, something about art class and a pretend volcano experiment. Daniel listened, nodding in rhythm, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips, though his thoughts had already begun drifting toward another long shift at the warehouse. By 7:10, they were ready. Daniel slung his worn work bag over his shoulder, its frayed strap barely holding, and handed Emma her small purple backpack. Stepping outside, they were greeted by a grey, cloud-thick sky, the kind that hinted rain but held its peace. The street was quiet, save for the slow groan of a garbage truck a few blocks away. They walked hand in hand, Daniel's grip gentle yet firm. Emma skipped beside him, humming a tune from last night's cartoon. The sidewalk was damp from the morning dew, the air crisp against their faces. At the corner a few other parents and children had already gathered. Daniel offered a few polite nods, but remained as reserved as always. Then came the familiar sound, the grumble of the bus engine, the slight screech of brakes. The yellow bus rolled up, stopping before them. Its door opened with a hiss. The driver, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair, smiled warmly. "Morning, sweetheart." "Hi, Miss Jenny," Emma called out, climbing aboard. At the top of the steps she turned, grinning. "Bye, Daddy. Bye, baby. Be good today." And like many mornings before, the bus rolled away. Emma's little face pressed to the window, shrinking slowly until the bus rounded the corner and disappeared. Daniel stood still a little longer than usual. Something about the air felt off. Perhaps the weight of the clouds, or the unusual silence, or maybe just his own wariness. He took a breath, stuffed his hands into his pockets and turned toward the warehouse. He had barely taken a few steps when it happened. A sound, not quite an explosion, but heavy and sharp, cut through the still morning. Then came the squeal of tires. A rush of black smoke curled into the sky just a few streets over. Shouts followed. Screams, panic. Then someone cried out, "The school bus! It's the school bus!" Time froze. Daniel didn't think. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He ran. He ran faster than he ever had before. His breath tore from his lungs. His feet hit the pavement with fierce urgency. His workbag slipped from his shoulder, crashing to the ground. He didn't stop. Couldn't. The smoke thickened. The acrid scent of burning chemicals, rubber, and something darker filled the air. As he turned the corner, chaos came into view. The bus, Emma's bus, was engulfed in thick smoke. One side was crushed as if slammed by a force unimaginable. Flames clawed up from the back, glass shattered across the road. Children screamed, parents scrambled. Miss Jenny stood outside the wreck, coughing violently, struggling to help. Daniel's heart seized when he saw the trapped children inside. The back was already lost to fire. The front door was jammed shut. Children pounded at the windows, their faces panicked. Jenny fumbled with the handle, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Beside her, a mother screamed her child's name. Daniel didn't hesitate. He jumped the guardrail and sprinted into the chaos. Smoke blinded his vision. The heat slammed into his face. Jenny grabbed his arm. "It's too dangerous!" she cried, choking. "My daughter's in there," he shouted, though he didn't know if she truly was. All he knew was that someone's child was in danger, and no child should face that alone. At the bus's side, a small emergency window had popped open, but too high for the children to reach. Daniel grabbed the edge, pulling hard, slicing his palms as he forced it wider. Smoke gushed out in thick waves, choking him. A small hand reached for him. He pulled the child out gently, passed her down. Another followed, then another. His arms burned. His breath became ragged. Each reach into the blackness felt heavier, hotter. A woman handed him a wet towel from the crowd. He tied it over his mouth and pushed on. Then, a voice from deep inside. Two girls, trapped behind debris near the middle. "Please," the older one cried, holding her sister close. "Help my sister." Daniel crawled in. The flames licked closer now. His jacket caught a spark. He smothered it quickly. He found the girls. One was trembling, the other shielding her. He pushed against the collapsed seat frame, groaning. It moved. He pulled the younger girl free, then the older. Her legs stuck. He pulled again. It came loose with a jolt. Cradling both girls, Daniel turned toward the window. A firefighter had climbed up now, helping him pass the girls down. Daniel followed, every limb shaking, his body streaked with ash and burns. When his feet touched the ground, he dropped to his knees. But the girls, they were safe. One of them looked up, eyes brimming with tears. "You saved us," she whispered. Daniel, breathless, simply nodded. Behind him, someone murmured it was an electrical fire. Another mentioned a reckless driver, but in that moment the cause didn't matter. Only the lives did. His hands trembled as the shock wore off. EMTs rushed to help. He waved them off, barely able to speak, but eventually one convinced him to sit to be treated. Burns on his arms, smoke in his lungs, bruised ribs. As he sat on the curb, wrapped in a thin grey blanket, his eyes scanned the scene. And then, Emma wasn't on the bus. A paramedic checked. She had missed it. There was a note from the school, a dentist appointment this morning. Relief broke over him like a tidal wave. His body shook as the tears came. He hadn't saved his daughter, but he had saved someone else's, and from that moment forward his life would never be the same. Watching quietly from the edge of the crowd, a woman stood in stunned silence. Her coat was immaculate, her phone frozen in one hand. Parked behind her was a sleek black Rolls Royce. The two little girls Daniel had saved? The hero nobody saw coming. Daniel's breath caught as he neared the flaming school bus. The smell of burning fuel and scorched metal filled the air, mixing with the terrifying cries of trapped children. A crowd had gathered, most standing in shock, hands over their mouths, some filming with their phones, others paralyzed by fear. Smoke curled into the grey sky like dark ribbons, while the screams from inside the bus echoed like something from a nightmare. He didn't stop to think. Something in him snapped, awakened. He bolted forward, dodging past panicked teachers, yelling parents, and a crossing guard shouting for people to stay back. Heat blasted him like a wall, and smoke clawed at his lungs, but he kept going. The front of the bus was completely engulfed. The engine bay belched black fire, flames licked along the sides, windows cracked and oozed black soot. Through the haze, Daniel could see tiny hands beating against the glass at the back. He heard it then, a sound that tore at his soul. A child's scream, and then another. Two voices, high-pitched, afraid. He sprinted to the rear emergency door. His fingers fumbled at the handle. It wouldn't budge. It was jammed shut, probably warped from the heat. The metal burned his hands through the cheap cotton gloves he'd worn to work. He hissed in pain, but didn't back down. He took a step back and kicked. Once. Twice. On the third try, the door creaked and then snapped open with a deafening groan. Smoke billowed out. Daniel coughed violently, eyes watering, heart pounding. He peered inside, shielding his face with his sleeve. Rows of seats were engulfed in smoke. He crawled inside anyway. The heat was unbearable. He couldn't see. He dropped to his knees, crawling along the narrow aisle, calling out hoarsely, "Hello? Anyone there? Can you hear me?" A muffled sob reached his ears. To the left, fourth row from the back. He scrambled toward the sound. Through the haze he saw them, two small girls, maybe 6 or 7 years old, curled up on the seat, arms around each other, eyes wide with terror. One of them had passed out. The other clung to her twin. "I'm going to get you out, okay?" Daniel croaked, his voice barely audible above the roar of fire. He grabbed the unconscious girl first, cradling her against his chest. With his free hand, he took the hand of the twin, still conscious, and motioned for her to follow. She didn't hesitate. She trusted him instantly, a stranger but the only one who had come for them. Daniel stumbled back down the aisle, thus shielding their faces with his arms. Flames flared up along the seats. The roof began to groan above them. Time was collapsing, seconds melting away. As they reached the door, an explosion rocked the front of the bus. He lost balance, crashing into the side, but didn't let go of either child. His arm was now seared red. He gritted his teeth, lifted them both with every ounce of strength, and threw himself backward through the open door just before the bus's interior erupted into a fireball. He landed hard on the pavement. The girls were safe in his arms. Then everything went still. Someone screamed, a parent maybe. Someone else cried out, "Oh my God!" People rushed forward. Firefighters, finally close enough, ran past with hoses and gear. Daniel couldn't move. His legs wouldn't respond. His hands, blistered and raw, instinctively checked the girls. The one who had fainted was breathing, shallow but alive. The other girl gripped his shirt and sobbed, "You saved us. You saved my sister." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, the pain catching up to him all at once. "I'm just glad you're okay," he rasped. Then he passed out. The scene around him spun like a carousel as he drifted in and out of consciousness. He felt hands on him, cold air hit his burned skin. Sirens wailed. Someone pressed an oxygen mask to his face. Stretchers moved past him. Through blurred vision, he saw the girls being lifted onto gurneys too, one clutching the other tightly. Someone, a paramedic, maybe, was crying. "I've never seen anything like it," a voice said. Man jumped into a burning bus and walked out with 2 kids, Jesus Christ. But Daniel didn't hear the praise. He wasn't aware of the growing crowd or the news vans that had arrived. He was only vaguely aware of the woman's scream that shattered the air moments later. "My daughters!" Oh my God! A Rolls Royce Phantom pulled up to the sidewalk, skidding to a stop. A woman in heels and a business suit burst out, nearly dropping her phone. Her makeup streaked from tears. Security guards tried to hold her back, but she pushed past them, collapsing beside the gurney carrying the twins. "Mommy's here," she sobbed, cradling them both. My babies, my babies." Someone pointed toward Daniel. He saved them. She turned. She saw him, burned, unconscious, strapped to a stretcher. His uniform marked him as a warehouse laborer, his hands wrapped in gauze, his face bruised, her lips parted. Something inside her cracked. The cameras zoomed in, reporters whispered, microphones were thrust forward. But Daniel, barely awake, didn't notice. He opened his eyes for just a moment. The sky was still grey. A paramedic asked him his name. He mumbled something. "Are the girls okay?" he whispered. That's all he asked. Not about his burns. Not about the pain. Just that. Then everything went black. Back at the fire scene, footage of Daniel's act was already being replayed on live TV. A local reporter, choked with emotion, narrated the story as it unfolded. This unidentified man risked his life to save two girls from a blazing school bus. Authorities are calling him a hero, but he simply asked, "Are the girls okay?" In a city often cynical, full of busy lives and hard truths, something extraordinary had just happened. Not in the form of a celebrity, or a millionaire, or a viral internet prankster, but a quiet, struggling single father, a man no one had noticed until now. The hero nobody saw coming. The moment that changed everything. The hospital room was quiet, wrapped in a hush that only late hours and deep thoughts can summon. Machines murmured gently, their rhythmic beeping forming a soft backdrop to the silence between two strangers. Daniel sat on the edge of a worn armchair, his hands folded, his gaze absent as it lingered on the frayed edges of the curtain. He wasn't thinking about the sleek luxury car parked outside, nor the elegant woman who stood across from him. His entire focus rested on the slow, steady rise and fall of his daughter Emma's chest as she slept. Amara Sterling stood a few feet away, her hands loosely clasped. Her sunglasses had come off, revealing eyes once trained to hide more than they showed. The last few hours had smudged her makeup, her lipstick faded from the tears she had quietly wiped away. In that moment, she wasn't the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. She was simply a mother, a woman trying to make sense of something that had shaken her. It was she who finally spoke, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Thank you." Daniel didn't meet her gaze, he simply gave a small nod. "I did what any father would." Amara blinked, quietly surprised. There was no speech, no show of pride, just that voice, low, quiet, and weathered, carrying the weight of years spent putting others first. She took a small step closer. "She's your daughter?" she asked softly, her eyes flickering toward the child in the hospital bed. Daniel turned to look at Emma, and a faint, tired smile appeared. "She's my whole world." The words landed in Amara's chest with unexpected weight. Silence returned, not uncomfortable but full, like two people sitting in the same storm, sheltered but soaked. "I've seen people take risks," Amara murmured after a moment, "but I've never seen someone run into a fire without knowing who was inside." Daniel gave a small shrug. Didn't matter who, just mattered someone was. Stillness settled again. Amara's gaze moved back to Emma, small and curled up beneath the hospital blanket, one arm wrapped around a well-worn stuffed bunny. Daniel leaned forward gently, adjusting the bunny's ear with a tenderness that spoke louder than words. Amara sat in the chair across from him. Her posture was elegant, practiced, but when she spoke again, her voice had softened, stripped of polish. "What's your story, Daniel?" He paused, not from reluctance, but because he wasn't sure where to begin. Still, something in Amara's presence felt safe. She wasn't here out of pity. She was listening. "I was never one of the smart ones," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "School was hard. Words slipped through like water through fingers. Teachers gave up early, called me slow." Amara didn't interrupt. "My dad left when I was 10. Mom did her best, but there were too many bills, too many nights she cried thinking I was asleep." His tone remained steady, but Amara noticed the way his hand gripped the chair's arm a little tighter. "I started working early, whatever I could do. Car washes, shelves at the grocery, anything that kept the lights on. When Mom passed, I was 17. Years later, Emma came along. Her mother wasn't ready. She left when Emma was still in diapers." Amara's voice came soft, concerned. You raised her alone? Daniel nodded. Every diaper, every sleepless night, every time she had a fever and I didn't know what to do but held her anyway. There was no trace of complaint in his voice, just a quiet strength, like pages read from a well-worn book. And now you're here, Amara said, her voice almost a whisper, running into fire for strangers. He chuckled lightly. That fire didn't scare me. You've never seen a toddler throw a tantrum at 2 a.m. It caught her off guard, a short, warm laugh, the first since she'd arrived. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. I used to be alone too, she confessed. Everyone thinks it was easy, elite schools, trust funds, but none of that prepares you for life's storms. She paused, then added more quietly, my ex-husband once told me I'd never survive without him. Said raising twins while starting a business was just a fantasy, that I was playing pretend. Daniel turned toward her now, truly seeing her. He was wrong. Yes, but not at first. There were nights I believed him. Nights I fed my girls with couch change. I built sterling holdings in my kitchen during nap times. Daniel nodded slightly. Took everything, didn't it? She met his eyes. It did, and then some. There was a pause. Not awkward, just a space where two people sat with their truths. For a moment, they weren't a billionaire and a handyman. Just two souls who had weathered storms they rarely spoke of. Amara stood slowly, pulling her coat around her. She glanced down the hall toward another hospital room where her daughters lay. She needed to return. But something held her still. She turned back to Daniel, who was now gently brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. Daniel, she said gently. He looked up. Would it be all right if I learned more about you? His brow furrowed slightly. Why? She smiled, not with charm but sincerity. Because I think you're the kind of man this world forgets, and I don't want to forget. He didn't answer, but the silence that followed wasn't rejection. It was surprise. That night, as Amara stepped into the elevator of her penthouse suite, her mind wasn't on quarterly projections or board meetings. It was still in that small hospital room with the father, the child, the warmth that lingered despite the sterile walls. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Ma'am, the girls are stable. Doctors say they're lucky. She stared at the message, then after a moment typed a reply. Find out everything about this man, quietly. A pause, then a reply from her assistant. Understood. Outside her window the city lights shimmered, cold, distant, efficient. But within Amara Sterling, something had shifted. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't gratitude either. It was recognition, of resilience, of strength that doesn't shout, but simply endures. In a world ruled by numbers and power, maybe, just maybe, she had finally found something real. An unlikely bond forms. The sunlight drifted gently through the hospital room's blinds, casting soft golden rays across Emma's peaceful face. Beside her, Daniel sat quietly, his rough, work-worn hands clasped protectively around her smaller ones. Though the weight of past pain lingered in his bones and fatigue settled into every part of him, his presence was steady, calm, like a lighthouse standing strong through storm and tide. The days had been long, his body sore, his spirit tired. Yet each time Emma smiled in her sleep, a quiet part of his heart found peace. That afternoon, a knock came at the door, softer than usual. Different. In stepped Amara Sterling, not the headline-making CEO in stilettos and sunglasses, but a woman in a simple blouse and jeans, her expression gentle and unguarded. Her gaze first found Emma, then slowly moved to Daniel, who rose instinctively and nodded with respectful composure. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, her voice warm, almost maternal. Daniel shook his head. No, ma'am, Emma's just resting. Amara moved to the bedside and placed a small, worn plush unicorn down gently. This is Sparkle, she said with a soft laugh. She helped my girls sleep when they were her age. Daniel lifted a brow slightly. She'll like that. She's never had a unicorn before. In the days that followed, Amara returned each afternoon. With her she brought small gifts, books, puzzles, quiet games. But more than that, she brought something deeper, presence. She sat quietly on the small sofa by the window, her eyes sometimes on Emma, her words always gentle when she spoke with Daniel. Daniel remained polite, but reserved. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed by people with polished lives and polished smiles. But Amara didn't speak with pity. She listened. One evening, as the sun set and warm light filled the room, she spoke softly. "Why don't you both come to my estate for a few days? There's fresh air, peace, just a little break." Daniel blinked, surprised. "Ma'am, I appreciate that, I do, but we don't belong in places like that." Her lips curved into a quiet smile. "Everyone belongs somewhere peaceful. We just forget that sometimes." After a long pause, Daniel gave a slow nod. "Only if Emma's okay with it." 2 days later, a sleek black SUV pulled into the modest hospital lot. Daniel, dressed in his cleanest shirt and slightly frayed jeans, held Emma's hand as they stepped out. The contrast between their reality and the luxury of the vehicle made Daniel's nerves stir, but he said nothing. Not when Emma gasped in awe at the car. Not when Amara greeted them warmly. Not even during the silent drive through winding roads lined with trees. When the iron gates opened and the estate came into view, Daniel's breath caught. Rolling lawns, a sunlit mansion, flower beds arranged like art. For a moment he thought about turning back. But Emma tugged his sleeve, her eyes wide with wonder. "Dad, it's like a fairy tale." Inside, the mansion was nothing like he'd imagined. It didn't boast. It felt lived in. A piano bore the stickers of children. A dog barked from the back, tail wagging in a blur. A nanny waved as she disappeared down a hallway. Amara smiled and gestured toward the sitting area. "Make yourselves at home. The girls are excited to meet Emma." Emma, suddenly shy, clung to Daniel until two identical girls peeked from behind a doorway. "Hi, you're Emma, right?" one asked. Emma nodded. "I'm Lily and this is Lila. Want to see our garden?" Daniel hesitated, but Emma turned to him, eyes pleading. "Can I, Dad?" He looked to Amara, who gave a reassuring nod. "They'll be just outside." "Okay, Munchkin. Be careful," he said, gently ruffling her hair. As the girls disappeared through the French doors, giggling, Daniel stood awkwardly in the quiet, elegant room. "You all right?" Amara asked, offering him a glass of lemonade. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never been in a place like this, not even on TV." She laughed softly. "It's just bricks and wood. Doesn't make it more of a home than yours." He glanced down. "Ours has a leaky faucet and a view of the alley." "But it has love, doesn't it?" Daniel didn't respond, but the flicker in his eyes said more than words. Later that evening, while the girls played with dolls in the sunroom, Daniel sat on the patio, gazing over trimmed hedges and cascading fountains. He felt like a scarecrow in a rose garden. Amara joined him quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. "They're bonding fast," she said, nodding toward the window. Daniel smiled faintly. "Kids don't wait to measure worth. They just connect." She studied him for a moment, the lines on his face, the small scar on his forehead, the way his hands rested carefully, almost timidly. "You seem uncomfortable," she said gently. "I am," he replied. "I've lived paycheck to paycheck my whole life. This world, it's not made for men like me." Amara turned to him fully. "You saved my daughters, with nothing but your heart and instinct. The world needs more men like you." Daniel looked away. "That's kind of you, but bravery doesn't pay rent." Silence settled between them as the sky turned amber. "I wasn't always like this," she said. "There was a time I juggled 2 jobs and pushed strollers through rainstorms." He looked at her, surprised. "My ex left me a week after the twins were born. Said struggle didn't suit him. Said I was too tired, too plain." She chuckled, a sound brittle at the edges. "I thought if I built an empire, I'd never be left again." Daniel watched her closely now, really saw her. Not a billionaire, but a woman who'd once scraped by too. "And did it work?" he asked. Amara looked out into the fading light. "I'm still finding out." By the end of the weekend, Emma didn't want to leave. She'd discovered towering bookshelves, hot cocoa with whipped cream, and friends who shared her love for stuffed animals. Still, Daniel packed their small duffel. "I don't want to overstay," he said quietly. Amara met him at the door. "You didn't, but stay one more night. For her." He hesitated. "I don't want her thinking life just gives you things." Her smile was soft. Maybe life finally gave her something, because she earned it. Daniel said nothing. But that night, when he tucked Emma beneath silk sheets in a room with stars on the ceiling, he sat beside her a little longer than usual. "Do you like it here, sweetheart?" Emma nodded sleepily. "It feels warm, Daddy. Not just the blankets. The people are warm too." His throat tightened. He kissed her forehead gently. "Wherever you feel love, that's home." As he stepped into the hallway, he found Amara waiting. They stood in silence, the quiet holding more than words ever could. "Thank you for letting us in," he said. She shook her head. "Thank you for walking in when you didn't have to." The bond between them, fragile yet unmistakable, lingered. Something was beginning. Not born of wealth or chance, but of two wounded souls daring, just barely, to believe in warmth again. Truth, pain, and the proposal. The evening was still, more so than usual. There was no wind, no city hum, just the whisper of leaves brushing together as the last golden light of day filtered through the tall trees encircling the Sterling estate. Daniel sat quietly on the edge of a weathered garden bench, his calloused hands clasped in his lap, eyes fixed on the distant fountain, its water catching the twilight in a soft, silvery dance. Around him the garden lights began to glow, scattering warm light across the neatly trimmed hedges and blossoming beds. Behind him there came the soft rhythm of footsteps along the stone path. He didn't need to turn. He knew. Amara had a way of arriving that never begged for attention, but always earned it. Her presence was measured, grounded, real. "You always come here in the evening," she said softly, her voice steady, approaching him. Daniel nodded, his gaze never shifting from the fountain. "It's the only time the day slows down, like the world finally exhales." Amara took a seat beside him. The silk of her gown brushed lightly against the worn denim of his jeans. Two lives that should never have crossed, sitting quietly side by side. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just natural. A bird chirped somewhere overhead. The fountain's gentle flow filled the space that words didn't reach. Then she spoke again. Her voice, for the first time, trembled slightly. "Do you know," she began, "there was a time I thought I'd never be enough." Daniel turned, surprised. "You?" A quiet, hollow laugh left her lips. "Yes, me. The one with the estate, the company, the press headlines." She met his eyes. "But before all this, I was just a woman with 2 babies. No support, no calls returned." Daniel said nothing. He could see in her eyes that this wasn't a story told often, if ever. "My ex-husband," she continued slowly, "came from old wealth, the kind that never had to understand struggle. When I became pregnant, I thought we were building something real. I believed love would carry us through." Her voice faltered. Daniel's chest tightened. "But when it got hard, when I was up night after night with crying babies, unwashed hair, and no sleep, he said I wasn't the woman he married, that I had lost my shine." Daniel's hands curled into fists. "He walked away," she whispered, "just took everything, and I was alone, with 2 newborns and a voice in my head whispering that maybe he was right." Daniel leaned forward, quiet. "But you didn't give up?" She smiled faintly. "No, I started from zero. 1 old laptop, a patchy Wi-Fi connection, and a half-formed idea. I built it, piece by piece, risk after risk, month by month." She glanced around the estate with a vague gesture. "Now people call it success, but some nights I still hear that voice." The soft garden light caught the tears forming in her eyes as she turned to him again. "But then I saw you, Daniel, standing there with burned hands and smoke in your eyes, carrying my daughters like they were your own." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "You didn't wait for cameras. You didn't wait for applause. You just moved. You didn't run from the fire." Daniel swallowed. "I just did what—" "No," she said gently but firmly. "You didn't do what anyone else would. I saw the footage. Everyone else froze. You didn't." He lowered his gaze. "I'm not a hero. You're wrong." Again silence, but different now, not heavy, full. Amara stood, brushing her dress lightly. She turned to face him completely. "There's more," she said, her voice calm now. "Something I've been thinking." Daniel looked up, unsure. "In my darkest hour, I was abandoned, left behind. But you ran into flames, for children you didn't know." She took a step closer. The garden light framed her like dawn. "I've had men chase me for my last name, for my success, my world. But none ever looked at me the way you do, with respect. And I've never looked at anyone the way I look at you, with gratitude and trust." She stepped even closer, only inches between them now. Her hands reached for his, gently, firmly. "I don't need a man with riches," she whispered. "I need a man with a heart like yours." Daniel blinked, his heart pounded, her words echoing softly through him. Then, in a voice quiet but steady, "Daniel, will you marry me?" The moment paused. A breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere, laughter floated from the house. Emma, the twins. Daniel looked down at her hands wrapped around his, then into her eyes. No pretense, no pressure, only sincerity, only love. He opened his mouth. The words caught, the emotion thick in his throat. "You want to marry me?" he whispered. Amara's smile was gentle, her eyes glimmered. "I do." Daniel's head shook slightly in disbelief. "I don't have anything. I don't belong in this world." "You gave my daughters their lives," she said softly, "and you gave me something I didn't believe in anymore, hope." He looked again and saw her for who she truly was. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just Amara, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had walked through her own fires and still chose to believe. "I never saw my life going this way," Daniel breathed. "Neither did I," she replied, smiling through tears, "but maybe this was how it was always meant to go." Daniel turned his gaze to the stars emerging above them. The sky felt vast again, and so, for the first time in years, did his future. He turned back to her. "Yes," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you." And beneath the fading twilight, in a garden scented with roses and redemption, two broken hearts didn't find completion in each other, but a beginning, together. More than a happy ending. The sky was brushed with warm amber tones as the day melted into a soft golden twilight. The garden was alive, not just with blooming roses and fluttering lights strung from tree to tree, but with laughter, with life, with something that could only be called magic. The scent of jasmine lingered in the air, mingling with the faint, delicate aroma of freshly baked vanilla cakes and the gentle strum of a string quartet tucked into a shaded alcove. Daniel stood at the back patio of the grand estate, stiff in a tailored suit that clung slightly awkwardly to his modest frame. He adjusted the cuffs nervously, his hands still bearing faint, healing scars. His gaze was fixed on a simple mirror propped on a table nearby. The man staring back at him looked foreign, too polished, too refined. But beneath the surface, Daniel was still the same man who once counted every dollar, who once walked 5 miles because he couldn't afford a cab, who once held a small hand every night and promised better days. His breath caught when Emma stepped into view, her little dress flowing like stardust around her ankles. She beamed up at him, her eyes the same sparkling brown that had carried him through so many dark nights. "Dad," she whispered, slipping her hand into his, "you look like a prince." He knelt beside her, brushing a loose strand from her face. "I don't feel like one, kiddo," he said, his voice low. "I'm just a warehouse guy." Before Emma could respond, soft footsteps echoed behind him. Daniel turned. Amara was there, radiant in an ivory gown that shimmered with the sunset, not flashy, not cold, but graceful. Her hair was swept back, with loose strands curling softly near her neck, and her eyes held a calm, unwavering certainty. "You're not just anything, Daniel," she said gently. "You're my daughter's hero, and mine." Daniel looked down, his throat tightening. He wasn't used to being praised. Not like this. Not from someone who had built an empire, who had power and prestige. "I don't have much," he murmured. "I've never had much. I still get nervous using the microwave. I overthink grocery prices. And I don't know how to do fancy dinners or ballroom dances or any of this." Amara stepped closer, her hand finding his. "And I don't need any of that," she replied. "I've lived through boardrooms and brand deals, luxury and loneliness. I've had people line up to impress me, but none of them ran into fire for 2 girls they didn't know. None of them loved the way you love, simple, fierce, and real." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, and for the first time in years, he let them fall without shame. He wasn't being judged. He was being seen. The ceremony was quiet, held under a sprawling oak that had stood in the estate's garden for generations. A white archway had been woven with lilies and light, and beneath it 3 little girls stood, Emma and the twin daughters in matching flower crowns, giggling as they clutched baskets of petals. Guests sat in white chairs along the cobbled pathway. Some were Amara's colleagues, her trusted friends, and a few of Daniel's old co-workers from the warehouse. Men in modest shirts and worn boots, looking a little out of place but beaming with pride. Daniel's sister stood by him, holding back emotion. It was the first time in a long while she'd seen her brother smile without effort. The moment the music shifted, the girls stepped forward, tossing handfuls of petals that danced in the breeze like soft confetti. Then came Daniel and Amara, hand in hand, every step a gentle defiance of everything that once tried to keep them small. The vows weren't scripted. Daniel spoke first, his voice trembling. I spent years thinking I wasn't enough, he said. That love was for people with the right looks, the right bank accounts, the right stories. But you showed me that being enough isn't about any of that. It's about showing up, and I promised to show up. For you, for the girls, every single day. Amara's voice followed, strong and tender. I used to think love had to be perfect, polished, safe. But then I met you, and saw that love is brave. Love is running into fire when everyone else stands still. You've already given me more than most people ever will. I don't want a perfect life. I want a real one, with you. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Emma and the twins let out loud cheers. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Daniel bent down and scooped all three girls into his arms, his smile wide and unguarded. Amara leaned in and kissed him softly, like a promise sealed in sunlight. As twilight turned to evening, the celebration began. The backyard transformed into a scene from a dream, fairy lights glowing like fireflies, laughter echoing under the stars, the girls spinning barefoot on the grass. Daniel watched from the edge of the patio, a glass of soda in his hand. Amara appeared beside him, leaning against his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Better than okay. Just trying to soak it in." She smiled. "Well, soak faster. There's a dance floor waiting." He looked at her, teasing. "You sure you want to dance with a warehouse guy who can barely two-step?" She leaned in, kissing his cheek. "That's the only kind I want." They danced slowly, awkwardly at first, then more confidently as the music wrapped around them. Not perfect, not rehearsed, but real. And somewhere in the glow of the lights, in the laughter of three little girls, in the warmth of two wounded hearts finding each other, a new story began. Not a fairy tale, but something far more beautiful. A love that had been earned, a family that had been built, and a forever that had never been planned, but now couldn't be imagined any other way.